if, however, your feelings have changed, I would have to tell you, you have bewitched me, body and soul, and I love, and love, and love you. I never wish to be parted from you from this day on.
That were really moving lines.
When you consult the I Ching, you will often have so-called moving lines in your hexagram. With the results of the coin or yarrow stalk method, the numbers 6 and 9 point to Dongyao, moving lines. Lines that change to their opposite to make a new hexagram. 7 and 8 are Jingyao, lines in rest, not moving, not changing. This is what most of the I Ching books will tell you. Depending on the method that you use, you can have a few, many, or no moving lines. Many users of the I Ching struggle with hexagrams that have more than one moving line. So let's take a look at moving lines. What are they? What do they mean? And how can you deal with them? The following points will be covered in this video. I will talk about the history of moving lines. I will offer a suggestion how you can incorporate them in your reading. I will show how I do that with a real-life example, and finally I will end this video with a short conclusion. Let's start with a bit of history. What do old sources tell us about the earliest view on moving lines? Unfortunately, not much. The oldest examples of I Ching usage that we have, those from the Zhuozuan and the Guoyu, do not explicitly mention moving lines. They quote a certain line text or talk about changing trigrams, a very useful concept that I will talk about later in this video, but they do not say anything about moving lines nor what a moving line does, if it does anything. The earliest mention of moving or changing lines that I could find is the Yizhuan by Jingfang, in which he mentions that a certain line in a hexagram changes to make the next hexagram or trigram in the so-called Bagong 8 houses sequence that forms the foundation of his Yizhuan. But the Yizhuan does not discuss the actual practice of divination, so it does not describe possible changes of one hexagram line or a complete hexagram into another hexagram during consultations. We should not read Jingfang's text as a description of Dongyao, changing lines. Another text that I found was the Donglin attributed to Guopu. I found it in Xiangbinghe's Jiaoyi Gushikao, in which he lists examples of early Yi usage and categorizes them by the amount of changing lines in each example. Xiang was not the first to do this. Hu Yigui also compiled a list of early examples, including Guopu's Donglin, but Xiang's list is longer. Guopu lived during the Jin dynasty, and I am not sure if the Donglin is really written by him. He uses a lot of Najia or Wenwangua techniques in his examples that appear somewhat anachronistic to me. But summarizing my findings so far, I noticed that the early Confucian commentaries do not at all mention changing lines, whereas the early Najia literature, like the Donglin, that is more Taoistic in nature, does mention changing lines. But just as with the examples from the Zhuozuan, the changing lines in the Donglin and Wenwangua in general do not picture a one-way street by which the first hexagram changes into the second. Lines in the first hexagram can have an effect on lines in the second hexagram, and lines in the second hexagram can have an effect on lines in the first hexagram. This is a well-known concept in Wenwangua, which is a way of interpreting the hexagrams that is founded on Najia theories. Some of my well-read viewers might think, wait, Wang Bi, he wrote about changing lines, didn't he? and you probably read that in Richard Lind's translation of Wang Bi's commentary to the I Ching, which has chapters called Ming Yao Tong Bian, clarifying how the lines are commensurate with change, and Ming Gua Shi Bian Tong Yao, clarifying how the hexagrams correspond to change and make the lines commensurate with it, which is a really long translation of a 6-character title. When you read these chapters in Lind's translation, you might think that they talk about changing lines, but if you read the text carefully, and preferably the Chinese original, because Lind's translation is, in my humble opinion, not always entirely accurate, you will notice that Wang Bi does not talk about changing lines, but about change within a hexagram. This is especially clear when he writes, "Therefore the hexagrams have names from which categories of good and bad fortune ensue. When that time has been reached, movement and stillness respond accordingly to the function of the hexagram. By looking up the hexagram's name, one will perceive its good and bad fortune. By acting according to the time of the hexagram, one will perceive its movement and stillness. From this, the change in the whole hexagram can be seen." It is especially the phrase yiti that should be noted here. It means the whole body, which refers to the hexagram, where arti, a phrase not used here, refers to the 2 trigrams. In the same chapter, Wang Bi describes relationships like yin, response, and bi, alliance, that exist between lines within the same hexagram. Something that Wilhelm describes in his chapter The Structure of the Hexagrams in part 2 of his translation, a chapter that is an almost literal translation of the introduction to the Jiaoyi Zhezhong edition compiled by Li Guangdi. Wang Bi lived during the Three Kingdoms period, so he can be considered an early commentator. If he didn't talk about moving lines, you might wonder how important they actually were at his time. I'm not saying that something like moving or changing lines did not exist in early China. Many examples of early Yi usage clearly show 2 hexagrams that are connected by the line differences between them. But apparently this was not seen as a change from one hexagram to another. Merely it was seen as a way to connect both hexagrams. As I have shown in my second video, this connection was not a one-way street from the first hexagram to the second. Yet this is how many I Ching books teach you the usage and value of moving lines. But what moving lines do can already be seen in the name Dongyao, moving lines. They move. There is movement at that position. There is something happening at that level, something that needs your attention. There are several ways to deal with these moving lines, but I mainly use 2. Changing trigrams and line positions. In this video I will discuss the concept of changing trigrams, followed by a real-life example. The first option to deal with moving lines is one of the oldest ways, changing trigrams. Moving lines do not only change complete hexagrams, they also change the trigrams that they are part of. As we have seen in the examples from the Zhuozuan, changing trigrams was a concept used in the interpretation of the answer of the Jiaoyi. This idea that trigrams can be jing, still or quiet, and dong, moving, is already mentioned in the Datuan section of the 10 Wings when it discusses qualities of the trigrams heaven and earth. Chen, its stillness is in focusing. Its movement is in the straight line. Hence it produces what is great. Kun, its stillness is in contracting or gathering. Its movement is in opening up. Hence it produces what is wide. When heaven is still, it is focused. When it moves, it is guided by this focus. It moves in a straight line, unwavering, with a goal in mind. When earth is still, it gathers. When it moves, it is guided by what is gathered. It opens up so that it becomes available. The Datuan shows that in the early history of the philosophy of the I Ching, trigrams heaven and earth had the 2 qualities of stillness and movement in them. We can expand this to the other 6 trigrams. What I'm going to tell you is my way of using changing trigrams, based on what I have read in early sources combined with a bit of the early philosophy that tells what moving lines are and do. Most likely, this was not the way this concept was used in early China. A moving line is called a moving line because that line is either too much yin or too much yang. It deviates from the middle way. It is overstepping the proper boundaries. This overstepping is considered inappropriate because it affects the balance of the hexagram, which in turn implies an imbalance in your situation. This balance should be restored. The moving line is imbalanced and therefore also brings the trigram that it is part of out of balance. The trigram becomes unbalanced and it needs help to restore the balance. The help comes from the trigram that is formed when the moving line changes to its opposite. Let's look at an example. Hexagram 11 with the second line changing. This is one of those examples that many I Ching users struggle with. Hexagram 11 is so beautiful, it is called peace, and the text is also encouraging. How do I reconcile
the darkening of the light
with this? But when you look at the trigrams and their changes, this isn't so problematic. The second line is in the trigram heaven. Heaven can be associated with leadership, setting goals and directions, concepts, ideas, and focus. Because of the moving line, this trigram becomes slightly unbalanced. An unbalanced trigram heaven can become narrow-minded, egoistic, dictatorial, and selfish. To restore the balance in this trigram, it needs trigram fire. Commitment, relationships that fuel the inner fire, connecting, seeing the situation as it actually is. Also, protecting the weak with a strong and confident exterior. Now, what would happen if the first line was the moving line instead of the second line? In that case, heaven would still be unbalanced, egoistic, selfish, etc., but this time it would need trigram wind to restore the balance. Small steps, focus on the long term, pay attention to details, communicate, be inquisitive and curious. And what if both lines would be moving? In that case, the imbalance would be stronger, because two moving lines have a stronger effect on the trigram than one. The negative traits become more serious. With the first and second line moving, the trigram that is needed to restore the balance is trigram mountain. Set boundaries, stop processes, work from and through past experience instead of thinking of new initiatives. Preserve what you already have achieved. What I like about working with changing trigrams in this way is that each combination of moving lines needs a different solution, a different trigram to restore the balance. For each kind of imbalance, indicated by the moving lines, there is a different trigram that is needed to help the initial trigram. I see trigrams with moving lines as unbalanced, but what does it mean when a trigram is unbalanced? It means that its qualities are enlarged and have more force. They are controlling instead of cooperating with other trigrams. Each unbalanced trigram has certain traits that are harmful either to itself or to others. Unbalanced heaven can become a selfish dictator that is occupied by abstract ideas that are not practical or feasible. Unbalanced earth is passive and wants to play the victim. Why is this happening to me? And is unable to be supportive in any way. Unbalanced thunder is violent and wants quick and complete change without considering if this change is in any way beneficial. It ignores any consequences that its actions will have. Unbalanced wind likes to find excuses to postpone decisions and work. It is obsessed by details and is able to delay any actual progress. Unbalanced water flows downwards with its emotions and is unable to control them or to use them in a constructive way. Everything looks bad for an unbalanced water. Unbalanced fire becomes addicted and clings to things without any sense of purpose whatsoever. It becomes a hoarder, a magpie that is attracted to the shiny things. Unbalanced mountain is unmovable and nothing but a great obstacle that likes to obstruct any progress. It is afraid of the future and likes work from past experience, whether they are useful or not. Unbalanced lake is childish and immature. It likes to keep the situation easy and enjoyable, no matter the cost. It is easily attracted to drugs. This whole unbalanced trigrams thing really shows its worth in the practice of I Ching divination. In other words, it is time for an example. In this example I will also show a way to deal with 3 or more moving lines as well as a few other tricks. Someone mailed me the following session that she had with the I Ching. Let's call her M. M did not ask a question but stated keywords and phrases that were related to her concern. Scared, my ability to maintain work, money, writing, hoping. She received Hexagram 59 with moving lines at positions 2, 5 and 6. A very interesting answer from the I Ching. But of course there are no boring answers. What is fascinating in this answer is that all the yang lines are moving. But more about that later. Let's start with the trigrams. The lower trigram is water. The lower trigram represents the questioner. If I see the hexagram as a representation of the essence of the situation, which I almost always do, then this trigram tells something about M's experience with regard to the statements she addressed to the Yi. Emotional, not getting a grip on the situation, fear, a sense of danger. At the same time, the trigram tells how she can cope with this. Follow and accept the stream of events without trying to control it. Don't rationalize the experience, but accept the emotional response that comes with it, and dare to act on these emotions instead of using intellect. The moving line in this trigram shows that M is struggling with implementing all this. She has difficulties applying the qualities of this trigram. The trigram is slightly out of balance because of the moving line, making M insecure, pessimistic, unable to see a way out. Her situation is like water, so she should be like water. Go with the flow and enjoy the ride, trust your emotions. The moving line tells her that these aspects of the trigram are not balanced. She needs trigram earth to balance the trigram water. Don't judge yourself or the situation, accept what is coming towards you. Focus on result, growth, and how water can nourish you. When water is balanced by earth, the water can become more controllable, like the banks of a river that determine the flow of the water. They do not stop the water, but help it to flow in a more determined direction. A focus on personal nourishment and support, personal because it is the lower trigram, can help to cope with the negative sides of water and restore its balance. Earth does not take the water away, but it can help M to deal with it. The upper trigram is wind. Wind does everything in small steps and works on the long term. It is determined and never gives up. It is undaunted by hindrances because it knows that every hindrance is temporary and can be circumvented. It is inquisitive by nature and focuses on details that makes the final outcome more certain and reliable. This is what the situation asks of M with respect to her surrounding or other parties. Make progress in small steps, make a planning if possible, and focus on the little things that are manageable. If money is an issue, then there are ways to deal with it by increasing it in small steps. If work is an issue, then wind might indicate that a curious and inquisitive and gentle attitude can make it less of a burden. All in all, wind asks of M that she addresses the outer situation with gentleness and persistence. Progress in small steps with certainty has more chances of success than one bold move. The latter is what thunder would do. But the moving lines in this trigram show that M is struggling with this. The way she tries to put the qualities of wind to good use is unbalanced. She delays decisions that can help her to advance, focuses on details that are not at all essential, and tries to find excuses to postpone the necessary actions that could help her in this situation. Sorry, M. To regain balance again in this hexagram, she needs trigram Earth. Work with what comes towards you and make sure that what you do gives concrete and solid results. Working from a supportive role without thinking that you have to exercise some kind of leadership can help you to do the trigram wind. In other words, if work is an issue, then accept a supportive role that is focused on others' needs. At the same time, being curious and sincerely interested in their needs. If money is an issue, then see how being supportive in small but consistent matters can help you to improve your financial situation. Doing little things for others can have significant effects for your own situation. Maybe not immediately, but definitely later, as long as you keep doing it consistently and with a focus on the little things. If writing is an issue, then M should focus on the characters in her story that have a supportive role. She could work on the details that make the story come to life, especially paying attention to the role of the female or female principal that weaves the fabric of the story. There are details that need to be worked out and need to support the final outcome of certain chapters or storylines. When you have 3 moving lines, you can combine them to a trigram. A trigram that is completely unbalanced because it consists completely of moving lines. It is interesting that in this case the 3 moving lines are all yang lines. They make trigram heaven. However, a completely unbalanced trigram heaven. An unbalanced trigram heaven is inclined to be egoistic, tends to be narrow-minded, and does not see the larger picture nor the interconnection between all aspects of the situation. It singles out separate aspects, and by doing so, it does not see how these aspects are influencing each other. M fails to see the connection between work, money, writing, and hope. Sorry, M. Her focus is on all these separate things, but they are all connected. This unbalanced trigram heaven needs trigram Earth to regain balance. Nourishment, acceptance without judging the worth of each aspect. Instead, M should treat all these aspects as the bees in a beehive. They are all part of a bigger picture. M, you are the queen of the hive, and if you are able to see the connection between all the keywords that you address to the key, it will be easier for you to accept their conditions. Even better, they might work for you instead of against you when you don't see them as threats. This is how I work with changing trigrams. Again, I must emphasize that this is how I work with changing trigrams and their interaction. There might be other ways to make them meaningful. If you have suggestions, please leave them in the comments. A valuable resource that can tell you a lot more about moving lines and possible ways to deal with them is the website of Hilary Barrett. I highly recommend it and will leave a link to it in the description. In the next video, I will continue to explore moving lines, but this time by looking at Yahweh, line positions. Thank you for watching.